There was a time when the dinner hall wasn't just about food. It was about survival. You'd queue with your metal tray, either serving ladies with their hairnets and ladles, and brace yourself for whatever combination of beige and brown awaited. These weren't just meals, they were childhood battlegrounds where Brussels sprouts met resistance and semolina sparked rebellion. If you remember dodging lumpy custard and trading puddings like currency, then you lived through the legendary era of British school dinners. Hit subscribe, give us a like, and tell us in the comments which dinner made you consider packing sandwiches forever. Liver and onions with mashed potato. Nothing struck fear into a child's heart quite like the sight of liver and onions on the dinner menu. Those greyish-brown slabs of organ meat, swimming in watery gravy with limp onions, were the stuff of playground nightmares. The texture was chewy and metallic, and no amount of mashed potato could mask that distinctive iron taste that lingered long after the dinner bell. Dinner ladies would pile it onto your tray with military precision, completely immune to pleading eyes and desperate negotiations. You'd sit there, fork hovering over this nutritional necessity, knowing full well that pudding was held hostage until you cleared your plate. Many a child learned the art of strategic pocket storage or creative napkin disposal during liver and onions day. It was character building, they said. It was torture, we knew. Tapioca pudding, frog spawn. If ever a pudding earned a nickname that perfectly captured its horrifying appearance, it was tapioca. Those translucent, slimy pearls floating in thin, sweet milk looked exactly like frog spawn, and unfortunately, the texture lived up to the comparison. Served lukewarm in metal bowls, often with a skin on top that would wobble ominously as you approached, tapioca was the dessert that divided dining halls across Britain. Some children would gulp it down quickly to avoid thinking about what they were eating, whilst others would sit there, spoon in hand, trying to work up the courage for that first mouthful. The dinner ladies seemed to take perverse pleasure in serving extra-large portions to the hesitant, as if quantity might somehow make it more appealing. It never did. Spam fritters with chips. The spam fritter was British school catering at its most practical and least appetizing. These golden brown rectangles of processed meat, coated in thick, greasy batter, arrived on your tray still glistening from the deep fryer. The spam inside had that distinctive pink hue and salty, artificial taste that could only come from a tin, whilst the batter provided a satisfyingly crunchy exterior that often hid the questionable contents within. Served alongside pale, soggy chips that had seen better days under the heat lamps, it was the kind of meal that filled you up without necessarily satisfying you. Yet there was something oddly comforting about its predictable awfulness. You knew exactly what you were getting, and sometimes, in the chaos of school life, that consistency was oddly reassuring, even if it meant another encounter with processed pork product. Semolina with a blob of jam. Semolina was the pudding that tested your creativity as much as your appetite. This pale, lumpy porridge-like dessert would arrive in your bowl looking distinctly unappetizing, topped with a single blob of bright red jam that sat like a lonely island in a sea of beige. The texture was grainy and slightly gluey, sticking to your spoon in ways that defied physics and appetite alike. The clever ones would create patterns with their jam, making swirls and spirals to distract from the actual eating process. Others would attempt to distribute the jam evenly, hoping that a hint of sweetness might mask the chalky, bland flavor of the semolina itself. It was cheap, filling, and nutritious, the dinner ladies would insist, but to most children, it remained a mystery why anyone thought this constituted a proper dessert when there were perfectly good sponge puddings in the world. Mince and dumplings. The mysterious mince appeared on school dinner menus with alarming regularity, and its exact contents remained one of life's great unsolved mysteries. This grey-brown mixture, liberally seasoned with what appeared to be sawdust and wishful thinking, was topped with heavy, doughy dumplings that had the consistency of wet cement. The mince itself bore little resemblance to any meat you might recognize, leading to playground speculation about its true origins that ranged from the plausible to the fantastical. The dumplings, meanwhile, seemed designed to fill you up as quickly and cheaply as possible, expanding in your stomach like edible concrete mix. Yet despite its dubious composition and appearance, there was something hearty about this combination that made it oddly satisfying on cold winter days. It was institutional food at its most institutional, but it did the job of keeping hungry children fed, even if it didn't inspire much enthusiasm in the process. Fish fingers with beans and chips. Fish fingers represented the closest thing to excitement that many school dinner menus offered. These orange breadcrumbed rectangles of processed fish were familiar, reliable, and actually resembled something you might willingly eat at home. Served alongside a mountain of baked beans in fluorescent orange sauce and the inevitable portion of chips, it was the meal that caused the shortest queues and the fewest complaints. The fish fingers might have been slightly burnt around the edges and the chips might have been reheated one too many times, but compared to liver and onions or mysterious mince, this combination felt like a feast. Children would actually look forward to Fish Finger Day, trading other dinner tickets or saving up their dinner money just to ensure they didn't miss out. It was proof that school catering could, occasionally, get it right, even if the bar was set remarkably low. Spotted Dick with custard. Spotted Dick was the pudding that guaranteed sniggers from every table in the dining hall, purely because of its unfortunate name. This heavy, stodgy suet pudding, dotted with currants that resembled insects trapped in dough, was served in thick slices alongside lumpy, lukewarm custard that had formed a skin during its journey from kitchen to table. The pudding itself was dense and filling, with a texture that could best be described as aggressively chewy, whilst the custard provided a sweet, if somewhat gritty, contrast. Despite its unpromising appearance and juvenile humor-inducing name, Spotted Dick had its defenders among the student population. It was proper British pudding, they argued, the kind of hearty dessert that had sustained generations of school children. Whether this was endorsement or warning remained open to interpretation, but it certainly filled you up and kept you going through double geography on a Tuesday afternoon. Corned beef hash with cabbage. Corned beef hash was the dinner that arrived looking like it had already been partially digested. This pink and grey mixture of processed meat and potato, fried until it achieved a distinctly unappetizing color palette, was accompanied by cabbage that had been boiled into submission until it surrendered any pretense of nutritional value or flavor. The hash itself had a salty, artificial taste that clung to your palate long after the meal was over, whilst the cabbage provided a soggy, slightly bitter counterpoint that did nothing to improve the overall experience. Yet there was something undeniably filling about this combination, a working-class heartiness that spoke to post-war sensibilities about making the most of whatever ingredients were available. It might not have been delicious, but it was substantial, and in the world of institutional catering, substantial often had to suffice when delicious proved elusive or economically unfeasible. Toad in the hole with gravy. Toad in the hole promised so much and delivered so very little. This supposedly comforting combination of sausages nestled in Yorkshire pudding batter should have been a highlight of the school dinner menu, but institutional cooking had a way of transforming even the most promising ingredients into something that challenged both appetite and spirit. The sausages were invariably the cheapest available, pale and watery with a texture that suggested more cereal than meat, whilst the Yorkshire pudding batter had usually failed to rise properly, resulting in a flat, duggy base that absorbed grease rather than providing the light, airy contrast that proper Yorkshire pudding should offer. The gravy, meanwhile, was thin and brown, with a flavour that defied identification and a consistency that suggested it had been mixed with more water than was strictly advisable. It was a noble attempt at traditional British cuisine that somehow lost its way between kitchen and classroom. Jam roly-poly with more custard. Jam roly-poly was the pudding that looked like a bandaged limb and often tasted about as appetizing. This cylindrical creation of suet pastry wrapped around a thin smear of jam was sliced into thick rounds that revealed the spiraling pattern within, like a sweet geological formation that had been excavated from the depths of institutional catering. The pastry was heavy and slightly soggy, with a texture that required serious jaw work to break down, whilst the jam provided occasional bursts of artificial fruit flavor that served as brief respites from the otherwise bland experience. Served with the inevitable accompaniment of lumpy custard, it represented everything that was both terrible and oddly nostalgic about school desserts. It was stodgy, unimaginative, and utterly predictable, yet somehow it filled you up and sent you back to afternoon lessons with that particular satisfaction that comes from having consumed something genuinely substantial, even if you couldn't quite call it delicious. These weren't just school dinners, they were rites of passage served on metal trays. Every spoonful of lumpy custard and every encounter with mysterious mints was a shared experience that bonded generations of British schoolchildren in collective bewilderment and grudging acceptance. They've mostly vanished now, replaced by healthier options and more appealing menus, but they remain etched in memory like a particularly vivid nightmare that somehow feels nostalgic in hindsight. If this brought back memories of dinner hall battles and pudding negotiations, subscribe for more slices of British childhood, one institutional meal at a time.